Hasimbonanga Mandela thina laphe khona laphe hleli khona Hasimbonanga Mandela thina laphe khona laphe hleli khona.
November 1989, and the result of the first free election for Africa's final colonial outpost, Namibia, is officially declared.
In fulfillment of my responsibility, under paragraph 6 of the proposal for a settlement of the Namibian situation, and in accordance with Security Council Resolution 435 of 1978, I hereby certify that the electoral process in Namibia has at each stage been free and fair, and it has been conducted to my satisfaction. I thank you.
After more than 100 years of foreign domination and 25 years of bloody guerrilla warfare, the outcome of Namibia's first election literally had people dancing in the streets. This is the story of the birth of a nation, the United Nations' newest member, and the role Australia had in achieving a distant peace. During 1989, following a period of intense military training at Holsworthy near Sydney, two contingents of troops left Sydney for the former South African territory of Namibia as part of the United Nations Transition Assistance Group, UNTAG, an international military and civilian project established to ensure the peaceful early independence of Namibia through free and fair monitored elections. The Namibian project was the largest Australian military operation since the Vietnam War, a deployment for which the Army had been preparing since 1978. For most of the 600 diggers and the small contingent of New Zealanders involved, it was their first experience of Africa and the closest they'd ever been to real military conflict. Lying on Africa's west coast, Namibia is bordered by Angola, Botswana and South Africa. The country of just over 1 million people was being assisted to a peaceful transition to nationhood. For the past 100 years, like most of Africa, Namibia had undergone a colonial experience, firstly with the Germans, then the South Africans. But since the end of the Second World War, the small state had been gripped by a brutal war of independence. On one side, the South Africans, on the other, the Southwest African People's Organization, SWAPO, and its allies, Angola and Cuba. In 1988, after more than 40 years of military and diplomatic conflict, all warring parties agreed to accept the implementation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 435, clearing the way for the peace process to begin. During April and May 1989, South Africa began its orderly and gradual withdrawal of troops. Replacing the hostile rivals, a United Nations contingent of more than 7,000 military and civilian personnel from 107 countries. The military commander, India's Lieutenant General Prem Chand.
The main role of any organization of the UN, like a force like mine, is to implement what has been agreed by the two parties. basically there are two parties, and again, like two teams in a cricket match or a football match, and there are certain rules laid down, and the referee or whoever is directing it, controlling it, relies on the extent to which they are prepared to go along with the rules.
Comprised mainly of engineers and support staff, the headquarters of the Australian contingent was based in Namibia's administrative, cultural and financial capital, Windhoek. The chief engineer's headquarters staff were housed in relative luxury on the outskirts of the city at the Pastoral Centre, an old boys' home. Meanwhile, the engineers' squadron was based at the major regional centre of Grootfontein on Namibia's central plateau, with troop forces at Ondangwa and Rundu in the north, near the volatile Angolan border. The Grootfontein-based 17 construction squadron was accommodated at the South African Defence Force base, where the Australians established a close working relationship with the South Africans, who were interested in comparing equipment and military procedures.
One group that I've been particularly pleased with by way of cooperation has been the South African Defence Forces. They've been instrumental in the initial training of our troops, particularly the field engineers in the early stages, and they've been involved in mine warfare training, briefing us with the various types of explosive ordnance that we're finding all around the countryside at the moment.
One of Australia's forward bases was at Ondangwa in the heart of Ovambo land, which is only about 50 kilometres from the Angolan border and the former main route for infiltrating guerrillas, the scene of many bloody skirmishes between the South African troops and SWAPO fighters. Remnants of the fighting littered the countryside. It was the Australian engineers who were responsible for the dangerous task of cleaning up.
Yeah. And exactly now, there's 4 lengths. How many seconds?
Okay.
4 times 44.
4 lengths of 44. That's 216.
216.
Sorry, 2 minutes 16 seconds. It should have.
Cut us first 300 mil and do a test burn for me. Let you know the time on it. All Macca?
I can't, mate. It wasn't that far.
Our main tasks have been DMEA tasks, i.e. demolition of malfunction explosive ordnance. We've had two main tasks in this area, one down at Meerschoup Camp, which is approximately 70 kilometres south of here. It was an old mortar range, and we've disposed of in the vicinity of around 25 mortar rounds, being 60mm, 81mm mortar rounds. We had another task where we've disposed of some 15-odd 90mm high explosive anti-tank rounds, and that's approximately 50 kilometres north of here, just outside of the township of Oshakati.
Knowledge of explosives and disposal techniques were passed on to Malaysian troops based nearby. Locals often ignored the dangerous explosives, accepting them as part of everyday life, which for the past 20 years they had been. The Australians were also responsible for the delicate and risky job of clearing and disposing of landmines, deadly reminders of the long and bloody guerrilla war.
Mahani Camp is an old SADF base. All the SADF bases are surrounded by a protective minefield. On the 21st of September, a local was walking through the minefield, accidentally trod on what's known as an R2M2 anti-personnel mine and lost his foot. So we then went up, investigated the incident, found a further 5 R2M2 mines and a 120mm mortar bomb inside the camp.
Encircling this ex-SADF base is a minefield. It held approximately 5,400 mines. After being rolled and cleared by the SADF, there were 700 mines left unaccounted for. I was tasked to clear a track into the minefield approximately 4 metres long and clear up to and around 3 R2M2 anti-personnel mines. I understand that I was the first Australian soldier to enter a live minefield in 17 years.
During the lead-up to the election, Australian reconnaissance patrols regularly moved throughout the area of operations.
My furthest working station at the moment would be Ruakana, which is approximately 300 kilometres northwest of here.
Ruakana, on the Angolan border, was a former strategic stronghold. It's home of the Himbas, claimed to be the 7th least civilized tribe in the world.
Got no money and I can't get to sleep. Takes all my courage to look down that long road. Going to Kiali with such a heavy load. I got to Shinja, Kena, Kungeli Sibindi. Shinja, Kena, Kumabili. I got to Shinja, Kungeli Sibindi. Shinja, Kena,
Although armed most of the time, the diggers' role was a passive, constructive one, as they were responsible for engineering projects.
The squadron is involved in a myriad of tasks. The prime one is construction support to both the civilian and military elements of UNTAG itself. We have, to a degree, a role to fill within the community, but that is in line with projects that have a military connection.
Every man has to be his own savior. I know I can make it on my own if I try, but I'm searching for a great heart to stand me by underneath the African sky. A great heart to stand me by. I'm searching for the spirit of the great heart to behold and keep me by. I'm searching for the spirit of the great heart under African skies. Sometimes I feel that you really know me. Sometimes there's so much you can show me. There's a highway of stars across the heavens. There's a whispering song of the wind in the grass.
We provide the engineer support to UNTAG, that is to both the military and to the civilian components. Our role has varied from when our contingent first arrived, and perhaps the major task has been the provision of accommodation. You can imagine the first advance party coming in here to Windhoek, then moving north and having to find accommodation for the 4,700 military members, and at that stage about 1,500 civilians. There's been a multitude of minor tasks in connection with improving accommodation.
These projects included the construction of roads, bridges, airstrips and observation posts. Hard physical tasks, which often meant working in temperatures as high as 45 degrees Celsius. The role of the Australians included tasks for which they were well trained and prepared. But the diggers were also confronted with disturbing situations they had to deal with, such as this hand grenade attack. The target, school children.
2 high explosive grenades were thrown into the school grounds, one of which injured 10 students. A couple of shots were fired into the school grounds, one of which hit a security guard in the leg. A white phosphorus grenade was also thrown into the school. Fortunately, that injured no one, and a 20mm high explosive rifle grenade was also thrown.
Although politically motivated attacks and violence continued, the majority of people were happy to see the long war in its death throes.
His name is Lucas Kappa, and he works for the police in Ondangwa. He says he's got 2 wives in Wambuland, stay in Ondangwa, and he's got another wife in Swakopmund, but he says she's very old. I cannot do so say. All right. He says he's got plenty of other women too, but they're not his wives. They just got his children. 3 I see so in Wambuland. He's got 3 houses in Wambuland and 1 in Swakopmund. Die 4 landmen getrap. He says he's very glad the war is over, because while the war was on, he actually went through 4 landmines, and he was shot in the leg once. And in that landmines where he was, 3 of the white men who was with him are dead.
The sappers attacked their work with such organisation and competence, they quickly won the respect of their international colleagues.
They arrived here on the 11th of this month and started working to erect a barbed wire. Brought all their stuff with them, barbed wires, the shingles, the cement mixtures, everything. 11 of them came down, right? 11. And they were given 10 days to erect this. And you'll be surprised that within 7 days' time, they finished the job. And I was really impressed. I even told my officers to have a look at this engineer people, guys, the way they work. There are 2 things that the Australians do here when they work. 1, they don't talk. Number 2, they don't walk. Guess what they do? They run. And I believe, as I've said, that this has proved that international military cooperation can definitely work, and it can work for peace as well.
The Australians weren't only held in high regard by the military, but also by civilians.
Now some of them come to the church service that we come. They are mixing with the community, and they really want to know how the community lives. At the moment, I think they're gentlemen. They haven't caused any problems. But what I have noticed is that this crew, the second lot that they've sent, they're much more military orientated. I think they are the fighters. And the first lot weren't the fighters. These are really blockbusters that they've sent us this time.
The Australians worked closely with the Bangladesh contingent, which was responsible for manning isolated outposts near Swakopmund on the Atlantic seaboard, close to South Africa's strategic port of Walvis Bay. The surrounding area is renowned for its stunning landscape and wildlife. Far from the scenic beauty of the Atlantic coast, the diggers continued with their daily routine, which often included aerial reconnaissance and monitoring at Rundu with the assistance of the Italian Air Force. Working alongside the Australians were their Anzac partners, the New Zealand Defence Force.
Sinking low, scatterlings and fugitives, wounded eyes and weary brows seek refuge in the night. They are the scatterlings of Africa, each uprooted one, on the road to Namibia, where the world began. South Africa, each and every one, in their hearts a burning hunger.
The Okavango River, separating Namibia from battle-torn Angola, where FAPLA and UNITA forces continue to wage war. The river is vital to the local people for a number of reasons. The Australian contingent built and operated a water point to provide uncontaminated water. One of the country's greatest assets, like any nation, is its children. Not only did the diggers have to cope with the constant threat of attack, the heat and hard work, their time in Namibia was also a first-hand experience of desperate poverty, hunger and need. For some, the need for food, scraps, clothing, and basic building materials was so urgent, personal safety was overcome by desperation. Not all experiences for the Australians were so ugly. A church service at Mariabrund, just outside Grootfontein. Mass, Namibian style. For those diggers living in the operational areas, the daily routine was made as normal as possible. Bacon and eggs for breakfast and making their quarters as homely as possible. But precautions had to be taken to protect the troops from catching diseases such as malaria. Tasty paladrin tablets, spraying and mosquito nets, while military duties continued. The Australians had to live with the constant presence of danger.
No one has approached me directly saying, look, I'm unable to face the danger that's coming up, or their perception of the danger that's coming up. Our INT reports have been such that O groups have been able to say there has been violence and there may be violence in the future, and certainly the commanders are giving soldiers all the clear guidelines that they need to stay out of trouble, and if they happen into it, to keep themselves safe. Some have a fear, and it's a fear of the unknown, I suppose, more than anything. I guess if they knew exactly what was going to happen, they'd know in which way to prepare themselves.
Finally, after the months of preparation, election day was almost upon the diggers, and they began to swing into operation.
I've just given them formal orders for the Operation Pole Gallop, which we conducted from the 1st to the 18th of November. We are providing 8 maintenance teams to the northern part of the country in Ovambo land, 1 maintenance team in Kayoko land, and 1 maintenance team in Herero land. In addition, we'll have 2 specialist teams, one based out of Ontangwa and 1 out of Rundu, and we're going to set up a water point in the vicinity of Kurukuru. The tasks of the maintenance teams are firstly to provide a security presence to the polling stations that are around the Ovambo region. Secondly, to provide engineer support in the form of hygiene, accommodation and water.
As part of the pre-election deployment, stores, equipment and weapons were issued.
Every man will be armed, and the rules of engagement are quite simple. They are to fire their weapons only in self-defence or in the defence of other UNTAG personnel.
Ancient
Intelligence reports indicated that any trouble would occur during the immediate election period.
The official position is that the elections will run smoothly. There have been a couple of hiccups along the way, but there's no trouble expected. That concurs with my personal opinion. I'd like to add, though, that locals around the area suggest that once election results start coming in, that perhaps some disaffected political parties might then start causing trouble.
Ten political parties were contesting the country's first free election. The public entered into the spirit of the historic occasion with an enthusiasm rarely found in experienced voters. The two major parties contesting the election were the Democratic Turnhale Alliance, the DTA, whose easily recognizable symbol was the V for victory. And SWAPO. At this small town, more than 6,000 supporters gathered for a rally attended by SWAPO leader Sam Kunjoma.
The third thing I want to say is that one of our greatest problems is going to be in the deployment phase, for the simple reason that the Administrator General's people still don't know exactly the precise location of some of the polling stations.
I'm going to have it inside this building.
The Administrator General's department was to be assisted by civilian and military electoral officials from more than 100 countries. Unfortunately, the amount of administrative and logistic expertise of the organisers proved inadequate for the task. On day one of the deployment, none of the 117 election monitor groups in Ovamboland had been moved to their respective stations. The Australian contingent was forced to move in.
We've been working all day preparing the vehicles for deployment. We have some 42 teams that we're deploying today, and we have the vehicles now set out in deployment order. To do this, we've had a contingent of 20 Canadians and 30 Polish drivers to assist us, and a section of 10 Australian soldiers that have been doing the manual labour of loading the stores in the correct order.
The lack of organisation resulted in mass confusion and costly delays. The problem was summed up by this electoral officer.
All right, well, what's happened with our polling team is that the AG's people have already flown up to the polling station without us and without telling UNTAG, and we can't leave because we can't pick up the ballot boxes on our own. Both sides have to collect them together.
I don't know. I'll have to make a plan somewhere, but I don't know how.
We've had a few problems. A couple of people have been to the wrong place. Other people have offloaded all their equipment but forgotten the most important thing, their rations. And as you can see, we've got a group of people here who were just too late to deploy them. They've got 4 hours drive in front of them, and you don't drive at night in this country.
Somebody is taking care of the rations, and we're not to go anywhere until he checks back with me. So don't worry about the rations.
The confusion continued for several days.
Our pre-packed teams, in many cases, had to unpack and reconstitute their vehicles and make another start, which meant we had to bring people down from Ongwadiva, take off their personal luggage, and then get them started again. There are teams that had forgotten to unpack their rations off the truck, teams that had already run out of water, teams that had left without their polling box and the presiding officer of the AG. There are teams that couldn't find the spot and arrived back here. So from what we thought was a fairly good achievement, it's down to a fair achievement. There's no question, without the organisation of the commander and the RSM, that we couldn't have pushed this whole exercise through. And while it does look bad at times because we have to hold the megaphone and have to organise people, and sometimes it's not going smoothly, I'd say without us and the combination of the British SIGs, the whole election effort in Novemberland in particular would have fallen pretty flat on its face.
So in fact, we can sit back and blame the AG. However, I can assure you, and those of you who were there yesterday know full well, that the organisation within the UN was a shambles. And quite frankly, nothing would have happened at all yesterday had it not been for the Australian contribution. The Australian contribution couldn't have been better. I was very proud of all of you yesterday, especially those diggers who worked their insides out all day shifting stores when literally hundreds of UN military and civil police sat around complaining, doing nothing.
I don't think they've really got their act together. Anybody that drinks beer at 8 o'clock in the morning is not really sort of geared up to go out monitoring. I think if a few more people were organised like the POMs and us, we'd probably get somewhere.
Although confusion continued at both the accommodation and central polling position of Ongwadiva and at the dispersal centre at Ondangwa Airport, all the electoral groups were finally positioned, ready for the opening of polling stations at 7 o'clock on the morning of the 7th of November. The Namibians took part in their first free elections with enthusiasm and patience, travelling long distances to arrive at polling stations early to ensure they had their say in the formation of their government.
Quite an amazing sight, particularly if you're not used to seeing that sort of thing. But we had a lot of old people come in, blind people, people coming in wheelbarrows because they were too ill to walk, so they're all taking this election very seriously and they all want to vote.
However, this electoral enthusiasm did cause problems. It appeared many of the voters didn't understand that the election was being conducted over 5 days. And so on the first day, lengthy queues developed at polling stations.
As you can see, the hessian and the galvanised iron is up now. We didn't have any of that yesterday. The pastor was trying to explain to the people that we had 5 days left of voting, but none of them would listen. They all had to vote on the first day and be the first ones in.
During the electoral period, the Ondangwa-based Australians were responsible for security at polling stations and for ongoing engineering services, such as accommodation, the provision of home comforts and the supply of water.
Basically, we're doing patrols around our civilian UN monitors, high profile, just to see what's going on around the area, keeping tabs on things, making sure they're okay, they've got all their basic needs looked after.
But many of the electoral officers weren't used to the rigours of field living, and the stations they were based at were anything but 5-star hotels.
And so part of our job has been just helping them cook a meal with the ration pack, how to use a hexawine, not to fall over and die when the gas runs out,
Yeah, not to eat all their rations in one meal.
Yeah.
We had a couple that were so hungry they didn't care what was in the can, they just ate it cold.
And this place was very hard to find, so we were lost. And we came at 1:45, and we just put our sleeping bags and built up our beds in the with the torchlights, and that's went to sleep. And now the maintenance team came to get us organized a bit.
The first night we got home, the Australian soldiers were there, and they cooked Andrea and I dinner. So we were spoilt, and we couldn't see what it was, and they said not to look, but it tasted really good. They found a mine up the road, they said, and somebody came and detonated it. So I'm glad I wasn't there. But they're all lovely. Everybody loves the Australian soldiers.
The Australians also had the task of providing a ready reaction force to evacuate civilian electoral officers and monitors during the election if the need arose. All members of this team were trained in the use of South African armoured vehicles, the Buffel, the Caspia and the Turbo Wolf, vehicles custom-built for anti-mine operations. These formed part of the emergency reaction force, which was deployed twice during the election period.
Freddie, get behind that wheel. Bring up the second one.
But you weren't there anymore. And the G-man stepped into the light and said, this is war. So be Jima, when I let it go, because I know that you are near the end. So be Jima, you're missing. So be Jima, so be Jima, quando sei, quando io mi lascia. So be Jima.
We all did pretty well. Everyone might have been a bit nervous, I suppose. Especially with this. Wouldn't like to shoot anyone over here. We're a UN peacekeeping force.
But some emergency call-outs proved tragic.
We had a report of a landmine exploding at a place called Namibia, and they tell us that there are 2 children that were killed. They've confirmed one dead and suspect the other one is dead. So we reported that in about midday, and that's about all we know. The cavalry's going to get it now.
Whiskey Mike 3, I'm in a location of a mine incident. Mortar fire, over. Whiskey Mike 3, children were playing with a grenade and accidentally detonated it. Mortar fire, over. Whiskey Mike 3, there is another grenade in this location. Request clearance to destroy in situ now. Over.
Called in to assist the Australians were the South West African Police, who assumed responsibility for investigating such fatal incidents. The despairing thing about Namibia is that many unexploded mines and mortars continue to litter the countryside despite the newfound peace, and that children will again become their innocent victims. Australia's reconnaissance and security patrols were very important to the success of the election.
It's very reassuring for the people in the polling stations, especially the Australians, to see a section of 3 buffels, or perhaps a wolf or a Casper, with a big kangaroo on it, manned by Australians, to just drive past and let them know that everything's okay.
On the final day of the election, these patrols were stepped up following threats to the collection of ballot boxes. The diggers continued patrolling throughout the night to guarantee that all votes would be collected and counted.
But you weren't there anymore, and the
Under tight security, the sealed ballot boxes were taken to the Central Electoral Office at Ongwadiva Training Centre.
We have 139 polling stations in Ubambo, so each polling station has a marked place on the floor. We will allow the counting agents of each registration political party, as well as our UNTAG supervisors, to inspect all seals before we start with the count of votes.
SWAPO won the election, but fell well short of the 2/3 of the vote needed to approve its own charter, an electoral result which has allowed peace to prevail. The 160th member of the United Nations now boasts a consensus constitution claimed to be the most democratic in Africa.
We've appealed to all Namibians of all political positions to see to it that they make good use of this opportunity which they have been given to them by the international community through their own struggle, so that they are able to decide their own destiny.
And I'd like to just say a word through you to the government and people of Australia for having sent us this very essential engineer support, without which we couldn't have managed here at all.